we're at a place now where there's no road to kick. We can't any farther. We've got to make some tough decisions. We've got a lot of infrastructure issues that we've got to deal with. Just inflation.
Cost of doing business.
You know, you've got costs that are unimaginable compared to what we used to have. We're trying to live on a budget that's not much more than what we lived on 10 years ago. And a yard of concrete is 5 times what it was then. We were paying $30 and $35 a yard for concrete 10 years ago. We're paying $150 a yard for concrete.
Asphalt's more expensive.
We were paying $30, $35 a ton for asphalt. Now we're paying over $120, $125 a ton for asphalt. And we've not adjusted those costs in any way.
No, and I think that because we have such talented staff that are so good at what they do, that when you go through the city and you see, things are landscaped, or there's flowers and there's seasonal things that occur, or, we have our parks, or your trash is collected consistently, we're able to provide community cleanups, those kinds of things. At times, it's a false perception that you're able to make do. We're making do at the expense at times of employees, and at the expense of running equipment into the ground and things of that nature.
20 plus years ago, City Council decided that a boardwalk into the Walmart complex, the whatever, River Bend Mall,
Yep.
whatever it's called. So they decided that would be a good expense to spend, to
Well, now
put
you're
in
going
a
to spend
board.
50 grand to fix
And
it.
now we've got to replace that sidewalk because of health hazard, safety hazard.
Yep, liability.
That's a cost that has come to us that we cannot pass on any farther. What's the cost of the equalization basically?
The engineering and construction design cost, we've not yet done the full award. As you know, we've bid it. It's projected with our VRA financing, though. What I will say is our total VRA financing, they even suggested that we increase our financing amount up to $400,000 because of the
Increase it 400,000?
Because
400,000?
up to 400,000 because of inflation. And so, Mr. Bryant, what did that take our total to with VRA? And we had that call last week that we were talking about with the financing for the EQ base.
Roughly, you mean the total for that project? Roughly 6.5.
So there's a cost that's a result of kicking the can down the road, not improving the wastewater plant. We may do, and poor old George is over there tying stuff together, baling twine, to try to make it run.
Oh, yeah.
And we're not giving him the money to run the plant to maximum, what he could be getting out of that plant if he had the money to run that plant right. So now we've got consent orders against us with DEQ at the landfill, we've got consent orders with DEQ at the wastewater treatment plant, because we have not funded those projects to the extent they need to be funded. Somewhere along the line, we're going to have to make some hard decisions in tax increases. We're going to have to make some hard decisions in budget cuts in other areas. Our Parks and Rec is top of the line. But when you start talking about health and public safety, that falls to the bottom of the pile.
It is one of your only non-mandated services, and I will say per capita, as far as localities in Virginia, you all do spend the most.
But
we have a great park system.
We see a lot of revenue off our park system. I don't know what our meals tax would look like if we didn't have the park system we have.
One thing that I would think would maybe be beneficial is if we had a fiscal analysis done of that. Trying to align, dates of events and dates of tournaments to date, to the sales tax and other things to then help with a really informed decision. Because as you mentioned, we're getting to the point where there's very tough decisions, and really that is the only area where it's not a mandated service. And that's sad, I mean, because it is a nice amenity and it's wonderful, I mean.
Something
I
you've
want
got to
for
look
Main
at with Parks and Rec.
Mhm.
The school system gets all of their football fields, baseball fields, softball fields, soccer fields provided free of charge from the city. They
All the
don't
main-
pay us for that I know of.
So one thing is, in the finance committee meetings, and it's something we're trying to work through in the funding formula, and we're trying to track on our end operationally, the cost of maintaining and the upkeep of things like Casey Field and the portion of the sports complex where the schools actually do some of their athletic practices, so that the school system gets billed back, right? So that then we track, do, and bill back. The other piece then too is, another good example is water. Schools don't have water meters. There's no way to even for
School
effective,
buses.
school buses.
School
And we
buses.
fix the school buses.
We don't buy the parts, but we provide
Free labor.
repairs, free labor. So when we're looking at $2.99 million to the schools,
There's a lot of in-kind services.
you're not counting any kind of services,
No, sir.
the free water, the free sewer, the free sports fields, the free bus maintenance. We're not counting any of that in that 2.99. So it sounds like we're getting a good deal here with 2.99. We're not.
No.
You know, you could probably take that on up another $500,000 with the in-kind services that we're providing to the schools. So at the same time, we've got police officers that aren't making as much as the people over in the other building are making. You know, we've got maintenance workers. David's sending people to Arby's to work because they make more money at Arby's than they can work for the city. We got,
Wait, you're sending them to Arby's?
yeah, he sent them over. McDonald's too, isn't it?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
$1,000
they
for 90
make
days
more
of
money
McDonald's,
there.
yeah.
So we're seeing the budget balance on the back of the city employees.
Yep.
Correct.
While we've
We're
got to look
funding
at
everyone
what's-
else's quality of life.
We've got to look at what's fair and equitable.
Well, and that's why I say, you know, it's coming at the expense of your employees, and wear and tear on your equipment, your deferred infrastructure management and asset management, and all that it's benefiting is the quality of life for everyone else but those that serve you.
We have to have commercial driver's license employees to push snow. The big trucks have to have a commercial driver's license.
Yes.
So they can go to work for a trucking company and make $18 to $20 an hour. Or they can get in a truck with a snowplow and a chemical spreader and go up some of these steep streets at the risk of their life for $4 an hour less. How do you convince somebody it's a whole lot better for you to push snow in 1 hour trucks than it is to drive a tractor trailer?
I think one of the things is, and we've been working on coming up with some information for an all people's meeting, the fact of the benefits of the health insurance, of what the city actually pays into health insurance, the fact that there is the VRS, the state retirement system, and what that means for you, what the city actually does contribute into that. So it's not the immediate paycheck benefit that you want to see. But I mean, and that's the reality. I mean, that's what you have to tell somebody. Because other than that, I mean, I can't give you necessarily what you want in your paycheck. But here's the other things that you do have.
But Alan and I have talked about millennials. They don't care about benefits. They want money in their pocket.
Yeah, well, millennials, that one meeting, they were the kind that
Well, I'm a
weren't worried.
millennial, so let's, it was a Gen Z.
No,
Gen
no.
Z.
Well,
What you are?
I'm a millennial.
Okay.
Gen Z is the next one down.
Yeah, but
So your
they want
kids that are
that.
fresh out of high school, fresh out of college right now, they look at their paycheck.
yeah, they weren't worried about the job. First, they were worried about where they wanted to go, and then they would get a job there.
Yes.
And of course, they said that, you know, they also like to take pictures of their food and selfies and send it out everywhere. But that was
But
just.
they don't care about the
Joke.
benefits as much as they care about the cash in.
No.
They want
That
cash
was
in
just
hand
cash in
and they want to quality of life piece, so folks, look for where do they want to live,
But
and then they look around the other pieces, but then it does come down to the paycheck piece.
It used to take, when I used to look at leaving,
Enterprise.
I worked in a VRS job for 38 years. And I looked several times about going and finding employment elsewhere. The way I looked at it, I had to have about 70–80% increase in my salary to cover my benefits. But that was me.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't looking at cash in hand, I was looking at the long range.
Well, and there's job
But you
security.
can't sell people that story anymore.
It's-
You've got to come up with some cash.
it's difficult unless you go back to, remember, when West Vaco had the retirees said, West Vaco unfair to retirees.
Right.
But what they were doing every year is that they were getting an increase in salary, and they, rather than doing the benefits.
Sacrifice your benefits.
Right, sacrifice their benefits, and then all of a sudden, whenever it comes time, they're blaming the company instead of themselves,
Yeah,
which.
you're right, you're right.
So,
So-
what we like to do? Mr. Bryant did some cursory math on the 5%.
I knew he could.
Had to pull out. a
For the
big
general
figure.
fund, it's about 150,000.
For a 5% increase.
Yeah,
And
that
then
doesn't
you-
include your
Yeah.
FICA or your retirement.
That's
So
just a raw
that's-
figure.
That's another 60–70% on top of that.
Just for FICA and retirement, you're looking at 7.5, 12.5, roughly another 20%.
Counting the VRS.
Yeah. VRS, our contribution ranges now 12.5 to 13%. It's not in the 15, 16 range now.
Okay. So you're thinking about, you're talking about
And 50,000 enterprise. That's our plants and our landfill.
a 5-cent tax increase?
You get roughly 55 to 56,000 per penny.
It'd be equal to 5 cents, right?
5 cents would be about a quarter million counting.
Yes, a little
May
over a quarter
may
of
I
a
make a
million.
recommendation?
Sure you can.
If you all are amenable, it's been a long day, to discussing a tax increase, and I'm very encouraged and pleased that there would be a benefit for staff. I would also say that then you would go the step further, potentially, and do the 10 cents, so then there can be money specifically earmarked for infrastructure as well.
And we've got to look at the infrastructure side of it.
Yeah, I mean,
The tax increase would help with the infrastructure.
Yeah, and as I laid out in the presentation, I gave you all just at cursory numbers, $90,000 is a moving lane mile of mill and overlay. So you're getting up an additional mile a year of that, or an additional $50,000 is a moving lane mile of slurry seal with thermolasting margins that last much, much longer. Or roughly about $200,000 gets you a quarter mile equivalent of brand new ADA compliant sidewalk installation. Those are things, I would love if we could do both. So, if we're gonna throw it out there, it's also important to remember that in the presentation that, I was gonna pull it, that Davenport provided, we are the second lowest real estate tax rate in the state. So a 10-cent increase still keeps you highly competitive with overall cost of living.
Basically, what, 9%?
No, we're at 80 cents right now. So it would take you 90 cents.
And that will probably get each of us cussed and shot at before the week's out.
Wouldn't be the first time.
I know.
Well,
And-
the thing of it is if we want to maintain services and do what we can for the people,
Mhm.
then sometimes you have to kind of bite the bullet and do that. And then, we're looking at it too. Just take a look. Our taxes are going up too.
Yep, I
But
will,
it's something that you have to talk about. and
Well, I'm
see.
still worried as more about staff and keeping staff and retaining staff. The infrastructure thing is a great piece to look ahead, but my concern still is
Well, you
what
also
is the
have
best interest of the
immediate
staff?
infrastructure needs that are creating some liabilities, but I will say, I lost my train of thought. This budget was incredibly hard to make. There is no more room for additional cuts. So there is no way that next year I'm going to be able to really come to you all and say, I can balance a budget without having to propose some sort of increase to make the ends meet. You know, the shoestring, the proverbial shoestring that we're balancing this budget on is getting ready to rip.
What was it? BB, Tommy, y'all might remember, in the late 90s before council gutted the tax rate. Do you remember what that was?
96 cents.
96 cents, and they took it down to
Because we had a high,
I remember the low, I think of a 58.
Yeah.
And we kept the 8 cent and left it at 66.
Okay.
I think somewhere along those lines.
but the tax rate was at 96 cents, and then we had
That was some point in the 90s, I think.
Yeah, it was
Mid-90s.
toward the mid-late 90s, yeah.
but because the appraisals were so high, they were able to cut it.
Right. Now appraisals are gonna be high going forward right now, with the way properties are selling and the way vehicles are selling. Used
But you
vehicles are
don't
worth.
have
But
that
you're still not
calculated
gonna
in
get,
revenue.
yeah.
Right, no, we
You're
don't
still
know
not
what
gonna
it's
see a
gonna
massive influx of revenue because of the rate.
be. See, next year will be our next reassessment.
Already?
Yeah.
I thought it was every 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought
Last year.
That's 3 years ago, I think it was, wasn't it? 2, 3? It's not far off, it's within half of it. We went through half of the time.
Time flies.
Yeah, we just had one.
Okay.
So
He said, yeah, 4 years ago.
No.
would it be the consensus of council for us to then you move on from schools, for us to come back and present a budget that outlines what a 5%, or not a 5%, a 5 cent and a 10 cent increase looks like as far as what it yields for, if you split half with employees and half with infrastructure on both? Would that be,
I'm good with that, to see what it'll get us.
Let's see what it is, I mean.
so then we want another work session? So
Not really.
let's just say, so is school's budget acceptable as is at this point?
Nothing's acceptable as is. We need to look at what we can do to quit kicking the can down the road. If it means a 10% cut to the schools and a 10-cent tax increase, then we need to talk about it. I don't know that that's what it'll end up being, but we need to talk about it.
So would you all like to be?
The budget we have is not acceptable if we're not giving city employees raises, if we're not dealing with infrastructure problems that we have. That's not acceptable. How do we get to that? We increase taxes and we cut schools. Or we increase taxes and don't cut schools, or we cut schools and don't increase taxes. But it's all in the same, we've got expenses we need to meet. And there's no place to get the money other than tax increases or cuts.
No, and as I
Or cut part.
mentioned, last year with the cost of living adjustment, that was the first pay adjustment based on inflation that staff had received in about 5 years.
And I think staff.
And that's not really a raise, that's just that my dollar that I got 5 years ago is still $1 now.
Staff would probably, the majority of them would be okay with just a longevity bonus like we've done in the past.
So calculate that as well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 5% staff and longevity staff.
So where are you all looking at for the cuts? Do you want us to make the cuts, or are you going to make the cuts? Because at this point, there's nowhere in the city's budget that I can make cuts.
I know.